All right, starting the recording. All right, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Today is October 7th for the Declarative APIs and Linters Subproject meeting. So I think we can just start at the top. I think last time we mentioned kind of going through our linting wish list for kubeAPI linter and just generally maybe declarative validation as well, what kind of lint rules we'd hope to see. So Joel, I see that you put some notes in there. Did you want to go through this topic?
Yeah, so I went in to look at KK and then the stuff that we've already implemented in Cal. So if you open that doc, there's a table there,
Perfect, yeah.
um, which basically shows like three columns, well, four columns. Is it enabled? Should we enable it? Is it ready to be enabled? And then notes on what it is, what it does, why it might not work yet. So going through this, most of the rules that we already have in KK could be enabled directly in, most of the things we've implemented in Cal are ready to go to just be enabled in KK, which is great. So things like comment start, making sure that every Go doc starts with the name of the field as it would appear in the serialized version, rather than the like Go version that you'd see. That's something we can just start getting enabled. The primary barrier that we have to enabling a lot of these things is that we don't want to break existing things. So a lot of these, it's a case of finding the exceptions and then adding Golang CI exceptions or fixing them where they are fixable. Obviously, the comments could be fixed, but they might require some context on something else where it was like the integers one where you're not allowed like just plain integers and they have to be int 32 or int 64. That would be a breaking change. So we have to add exceptions for those. There were a handful, I believe three, of the ones that are implemented so far that have gaps, where it was a case of like we would need more work on the DV side before we could make these useful. So one example I can see on the screen is the max length. What that does is make sure that every array you specify and every string has a maximum length specified. So I think DV supports that, but Cal doesn't currently support DV's implementation of that. If you were to look at further down in the doc, I think the next one would be the required fields linter. That then looks at a lot more things. So that actually needs to work out whether the zero value is valid. So it looks at lots of different properties, minimum lengths, minimum size on strings, enum values, all sorts of things. And I think there's some of that where DV hasn't got there yet. So that one might be a kind of further down the line one to implement for KK. But as I say, the majority are there. I haven't yet gone into the wish list of like Cal, the stuff that we haven't implemented yet. There's still like 18 or 19, I think, on the list for us to implement. But I can do that in the future and kind of add to this list. But yeah, does that help folks get an idea of kind of where we're at with Cal and what we could get enabled?
Oh, no, totally. This is great. I'm just kind of poking through these right now. You mentioned the zero value. Can you just explain, I guess, what Cal does today and what the delta is that you think about with that?
Yeah, so every field that Cal looks at, it needs to know whether the zero value is valid. So normally what you'd have is in required fields in Kube APIs at least, you would say if the zero value is valid, it doesn't need to be a pointer. Because if we would, and this is kind of a thing for CRDs and for built-ins, but for CRDs, we can look at the markers. So we could say, right, kubebuilder validation min value is 1 for an integer. So we know that the zero value is not going to be valid. So we know absolutely that if we see 0 there, that the user hasn't specified it. So we have this concept of basically like it will go through and look, is the struct zero value valid? Is the integer, is the string zero value valid? And then we can recommend whether the field should be a pointer, have it empty, etc., based on that. So it's all about the serialization rules.
I see. That's
We,
awesome.
let me find the Cube dev guide. Basically, if you look at the Cube API conventions, there is a flow. Where is is it? I will link it. Yeah, here we go. So I'll just pop this in the doc, which I've now lost. Yeah, so if you were to look at that serialization link, which I broken, that explains how serialization matters, and Cal implements that moment for CRDs based on these markers. So this flow basically is the zero value valid, is it optional or required? And the notes below that, Cal has implemented all of this, but without the same markers in DV, we can't yet do that.
Got it. That makes sense. And then I actually I put out just related to the goals. Did anyone want to discuss sorry, I don't know the chat. I don't know if there's any hands up or anything. No. I reached out, so that's awesome that these are the kind of the known tags that we have, and we have some gaps for DV. So that's something that would be great to kind of chat about and sort out. I talked to Stephen on Slack, who mentioned some of these like potential rules. I don't know. I still get some comments here. Did you just want to go through? Because I was trying to pretty much reach out to API reviewers to understand what maybe some of the goals were for them. I don't know if you had any comments here, but is this in the known rules that you have coming up in that future item, or are these kind of? I was curious, I guess, your thoughts on these.
Yeah, so I saw this list and I kind of responded to each. I've spoken to Tim and Jordan as well about a few of these things. So the explicit about optional or required. So each, like an exclusive or you should have optional or required on every field is something that all of them have brought up. We have that. That's called optional or required. I did start implementing that and enabling it on KK, but I need some feedback from the reviewers because there are 900 or so exceptions. So I think I went through and tried to fix about 50 of these by looking at the validations and how they're actually being implemented. But I didn't want to go too far because it was taking me quite a long time before I got initial feedback. So I will try and find where my work in progress got to on that one and bring that up to Stefan and maybe Jordan, Tim as well to see if they can kind of help out.
And then just to clarify, those would be 900 maybe fields that don't have optional or required.
Yes, that was like 900 existing fields in the Cube APIs that have no tag for optional or required, which meant I was then going through and basically working out based on the serialization, whether they were pointers, looking at the actual implementation of the validation in the storage. Are these treated as optional or required so I could tag them correctly?
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah, which was not a particularly fun afternoon.
Jeez. Do you want to go? Yeah, sorry. Then enums.
Yeah. So enums. Yeah, so I get where this is coming from. So obviously, when we have different enums, there's lots of different values. We want to document in the Go doc like possible values are X, Y, Z, and X means this, and Y means that, and Z means that. The problem I think we have there is it's natural language, and we can't necessarily link natural language. What we could do is use an AI for this, and it's something I'm working on within the OpenShift API type. So if anyone's interested, I can link a PR where I'm working on a Claude MD for getting an AI to do this, but I don't think it can necessarily be done with a linter. I don't know what the status is of like AI review tools for KK, or whether that's even something that's being discussed in the community. But that's definitely something that I would love to see solved. And at the moment, yeah, the only way I've come up with solving this is with Claude.
I think that's really interesting. I don't know if this is like the best. I don't know if like folks here want to discuss this thing, but yeah, I think this is a huge area of. I know our team is also very interested in AI PR review. A lot of folks, have a tremendous amount of like a big review queue. So, yeah, I don't know if other folks have thoughts here, but additionally, there's a work in progress around documentation of API types, because we're kind of interested similarly for the DV work. The goal would be to have maybe a site where you can kind of click through APIs, like generate a whole doc set for the APIs and then be able to see how they're validated. So, maybe also kind of the enum options could be a part of that. But I do agree it's maybe like, I think it's part of the goals of the projects, but yeah, it's not maybe directly like API Linter doesn't support such documentation pieces now, but I think that's really interesting.
A couple of quick follows on. This is Walter with Lilith's hand. Hey, Joel. So a couple of things. One, I actually have a PR out for KK, trying to start that conversation and get the first, not so much I'll get to the review tool, but just to get the idea of, hey, we should actually have some sort of ML hint files in Kubernetes. Like, let's just admit we're part of the modern world. Having said that, the other thing, and we would love to work with you on it. There's a new thing we're putting out called GKE Labs. They're basically open source, lightweight open source efforts various members of our team are doing. One of those is in fact a review. It's a more general review tool, but it includes some special things for KK. So ping me about it later. I'd love to see what you have. I'm perfectly happy to share with you. We have been writing ever larger, I mean, obviously for us, it's Gemini hint files rather than Claude MD, but I think a lot of that translates pretty well. So happy to work on it. And I mean, one of the things that I will say on the DV side, our biggest problem right now is we're PR review constrained. We're generating more code than can be reviewed. And I think that's generally a problem for all of KK. So I think finding ways to increase our review throughput or bandwidth is pretty critical. And I'll shut up now and let Bryce have a go.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say on the enum thing is if it turns out that something like I think Joel is right that AI is probably better suited to like generic documentation reading and interpreting of things. I could also imagine if somebody didn't want to use ML's AI stuff for whatever reason, we could maybe have some sort of thing that's like, if there's this tag, ensure there's some sort of regex in the Go doc comment matching. But that seems a little like challenging and probably not consistent. So just an alternative thought there for enum stuff. If it proves that might be if for some reason that is an easier pathway than getting AI review stuff into KK.
Yeah, I'll just follow up there in that I had a lot of chat, probably, what was it, last year, Salt Lake, with different folks about like AI API reviews and the concept of that. And we all kind of just realized that a lot of this is not complicated enough to need a linter, right? A lot of the markers and stuff that we can kind of detect is all static. It's only really where you start dealing with the documentation where it becomes natural language, and people are going to write things in different ways. I think I threw out an idea, or Joe, I think you and I were talking about the idea of that maybe one day we generate the documentation for the validations. That's a possibility in the long term, but I think that's a post-DV project. So yeah, I think for now, focus on linting. Some of these wish list things, we might say that these are harder. We'll defer these till we've worked out how we're going to AI things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think of linting as being where you want soundness and like 100% guarantee of something, and where you can, I mean, it's also way cheaper to run linters than it is to run AIs. They are compute intensive. And then an AI can then benefit like that from just like a person is. We know people write a lot better code when they have a bunch of linters kind of setting the guardrails. AIs aren't any different. In fact, I think they're worse right now. Maybe they'll get on parity soon and get better, but the more guardrails you have for your AI, the better AI is going to do. So I consider these two things to be completely complementary.
Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, for sure. Joel, do you have any other? I see that you put some comments here, but is there any other ones that you wanted of note here? I just see.
Yeah, I'll just run through this quickly. Min length on non-optional strings, I was challenging the non-optional. I think min length should exist on all strings. Like, even if it's optional, that doesn't mean it. If I specify it, I can still put the empty string, because that probably doesn't mean anything for most cases. So that's kind of like that's a separate conversation I should have with Stefan. But as far as I was working, min length isn't implemented in Cal yet, but it's on that wish list. I've got a work in progress branch locally. So that is coming soon, and that will check for the min length on various things, make sure that structs have a minimum number of properties, or at least one required. There's all sorts of stuff coming with that, so that will come. Description start with JSON tags I mentioned earlier. That's a rule that's already implemented, just needs enabling. And the pointers for optional fields, again, implemented, just needs enabling on KK. So pretty much everything Stefan's asking for, we are either planning or in progress, or it's AI.
Awesome. That makes sense. That's great. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, if we can get some of the gaps there, that's awesome. That there's already so many rules there that we can kind of add to KK. Cool. I think from the last meeting, it was mentioned currently declarative validation, there's some kind of either recent, more complex designs or some horizontal features that the project has that maybe folks were interested in learning more about. So I believe ratcheting and immutability came up as things, maybe of interest. So we could just discuss maybe ratcheting a bit. So declarative validation has a kind of, I can just pull up the docs from the KEP quickly. So just take a second. Yeah, so this is the PR that added some of the information around ratcheting. But yeah, maybe the easiest way to explain it, I can just jump back here. But so each field that gets tagged with declarative validation, ratcheting has a default ratcheting kind of equality check added. So when you tag a field as having max length, that field gets added a check in front of it, which is essentially like this object and everything that might be underneath it gets like a deep equals or a comparison equals to see if it changed or not. And only if the data changed do you then call the subsequent validations. So this is kind of this default ratcheting that's baked across everything, which differs, from the handwritten validation today. This is kind of manually implemented in some places today. And then it's of note that the list semantics. So if a list type is atomic, or map, the different list types also have different ratcheting semantics. So that would mean, obviously, we're doing the equality check. So that means if you might reorder a list, in some cases that would fire the ratcheting, in some cases it does not. And then this kind of leads into, so there's kind of some additional, I don't know if folks have questions around ratcheting here, but the idea is, I can try to find this an example, but that with this, then you can kind of add like ratcheted tags more easily with this default ratcheting system baked in. I can try to pull up an example, but first of all, like I said, anyone have any questions or anything they want to expand upon with the ratcheting kind of discussed there? I can't start on my thing open right now. No. All right. So that kind of leads us then into immutability, which builds on top of this default ratcheting. So I can jump to a document here. Cool. So yeah, starting in 135, we have this some immutability tags being added that declarative validation can be used to add a field. So this is actually going on top of a DRA resource spec, for example, is fully immutable. So it can be tagged as such. And so the project kind of identified that essentially on create, fields can be either in a set or unset state. And as Joel mentioned, with API conventions, there's conventions around which type is considered, what the zero values are. So we have kind of a list here, but do we have primitive fields, like pointer fields, list fields? I mean, the list is here, but in all of the, essentially they're set and unset representations. So these are the create. So you can imagine if something is immutable, from its create, like set or unset, then you cannot change this, or that might be an aspect that you want to tweak as far as your immutability is concerned, whether you can set or unset an object on the initial create. And then there's also then update operations, and updates similarly have a similar state transition, this set to unset, but also has a modify where obviously if it's set, you're changing the value of the set. And then it was kind of drilled down further in that this makes sense maybe for like single value fields, but for compound fields, something like lists, you can imagine maybe a different set of immutability around the items actually being added. So that is also a kind of state transition. So currently the tags that declarative validation supports for immutability, we have a plus Kate's immutable tag. Let me try to find this here. And this maybe it makes sense to start with the update tag first. But essentially, like from these state transitions, the idea would be that you have kind of granular control over these transitions. So when you tag a field with update, you can set explicitly which transitions you allow or disallow, and the options available depend on the type of the field that you're tagging. So this way, if in the API you might find something that can be set or unset at the start, or can transition from unset to set, like a controller maybe creating the field or modifying it initially. But then, it cannot, once it is set, it is required essentially. So this can be modeled, with like different transitions, and you can also have something fully immutable where even if it was unset initially, then you cannot set it. And so we have this update tag, which has the granular controls, and we have immutable, which is kind of the sensible immutable concept as a shorthand for the update tags. But yeah, that's where we are today. Currently, the list support is still being worked on. But in 1.3.5, we have essentially, like I mentioned, like some spec immutability going in. And then this builds on top of the ratcheting, because essentially instead of having ratcheting does these equality checks, and it does it semantically correct for each type. So we mentioned the list map type. So immutability builds on that essentially, where if the tag is fired, that means that an object was modified. So you can assume that you did not meet the no modification check. So it's just like kind of an optimization and a way to leverage the ratcheting semantics and not accidentally have any drift in what we consider equal. So I guess I'll just pivot back. Sorry, I don't know. Did anyone have any questions maybe about immutability or ratcheting as far as declarative validation is concerned? There's actually a recent convo too that Tim brought up in Slack around, I think, an issue that was hit with some ratcheting. So kind of relevant of late. Cool. I don't see anything here. So, all right, I can just kind of keep going. For FeatureGate, I know we mentioned this in the past. We can get to the next topic, but I just didn't know. I don't know if anyone wanted to discuss. Last time we mentioned this if enabled, if disabled, and the declarative validation versus CRD usage. I don't know if anyone wanted to discuss maybe, I guess, currently what's going on. I know Joel was in, I think, the discussion chat that I'm about to pull up here. But yeah, oh yeah, Joel, I see Joel's hand up.
Yeah, so this is a kind of interesting one, because there is a definite difference between the way CRDs and built-ins are going to work around feature gating. So we don't have a concept of feature gating in CRDs, right? You have a schema and that is it. But various people have built on top of that by having multiple versions of their schema. So in OpenShift, we have like a tech preview schema and we have a stable schema. And depending on what state you're in, your cluster installs either the tech preview version or the stable. I know Gateway API have a similar concept. I know the operator framework group have a similar concept, but it's all based on different copies of the CRDs. And so if you take a look at how that's being done, it's with markers that basically are, if this option is enabled, if this gate is enabled, include this part of the schema. And if it's not, exclude that part of the schema. The way that the if enabled, if disabled markers are defined today for built-ins, they require a payload, which is like some other thing within there. So that wouldn't work with the way that we're doing this in CRDs because it would not exclude the schema. So I think this is where we may have to just agree that there'll be a difference in the way you use this marker in CRDs, in that you could have it without a payload on a CRD, and that would allow you to generate your multiple matrices of different CRD schemas. But I don't know then how that would work if you were looking at, say, upstream types, right? Because if you have an upstream type embedded in your CRD and you want to only have certain features from the upstream enabled in your different versions, those are going to have payloads. And that then might make it a little bit more awkward. So yeah, do people understand the kind of way that people are using gating in CRDs today and how that aligns?
Let me. Do you have an example of the gating done in CRDs today? I'm not quite sure I understand. I understand wanting to exclude the schema because that's a pretty similar concept. I feel like obviously the gate is coming from this kind of external, like you're saying, like where the marker is. But do you have an example of, I guess, the gating that you're talking about for a CRD? I mean, just I guess to me it's not obvious the delta currently from what was stated.
Yeah, 1 second. So I'll try and find one on the side, but like take for example, I think if you had a feature gated field in a built-in type, the way you would have it is if disabled gate, then it would have the payload of forbidden. Is that right?
Disabled gate, the payload. I see what you're saying. You're saying
Payload to that function, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be how it is. That would be the plan for today, exactly.
Whereas, so
I just shared in the chat to some fields that I gated within an OpenShift API recently, using this similar kind of marker gating that we were talking about.
Yeah. So in these examples, the equivalent for us, if we were looking at the if enabled syntax, would just be if enabled external OIDC on this particular example that Bryce has given. But there is no payload for us to do there. Like the way that the tooling generates this is it just sees, okay, I can see if enabled this thing, I'll include the schema, or it would just completely exclude it if that option wasn't enabled. So there is no payload there, but if you look at the way the DV version of if enabled is implemented, it requires a payload. So there'd be no equals ... basically on this.
I see. And then the difference being that it's actually excluded from the schema. I guess, does it do the same thing logically, or you're saying it's like, that's the only thing I'm trying to understand?
Yeah.
Because I guess like if disabled will probably always follow forbidden, like it sounds like, you know, from our, that might be the most normal case. Although I think there are some enum related.
Yeah, so I've seen examples in CRDs of enum differences that are gated. So we would have, the way we do it at the moment is if the default feature gate is enabled, then you get one version. But if the like extra feature gate is enabled, you get all of these extras. I've seen that. I've seen maximum number of items in a list change over gating. And I've seen cell that vary with gating. But I think there's a lot more that we could do. It's just those are the only use cases we've had so far. In most of those, I think the if enabled, if disabled semantics as they are today work perfectly fine. It's just this inclusion exclusion in the schema that is different. And that's where, like, in theory, we could change it, right? We could say that actually, you know, if enabled, actually, I don't know what the if enabled would be. If disabled, forbidden would be the actual way that you mark something. It would exist in both schemas, but then when you installed the stable schema, as it were, it would forbid you from setting that field, which is a change to the way that people do it today, because at the moment it would just be pruned, because you would, well, I expect you don't have to preserve unknown fields flag set.
Yeah, I think that you're correct. Exactly. That would be the difference, like the pruning versus the disallowing of the field usage.
Yeah. So we could absolutely say, right, the way to do this is if disabled gate equals plus case forbidden. That's a change in behavior to what people have today, and it might not be a welcome change to a lot of the community, I think.
For sure. And then I guess maybe just like so for something like max items on a list, how is that done then? So with these tags today, so you mentioned there's if enabled, if disabled, how would that delta be done in a CRD today if you wanted to like ratchet the number of items in the list? Or I guess
in OpenShift, we have a specific marker that we have in a fork of controller tools.
I see.
That will inject, like, so depending on which of our CRD, like depending on which feature gate is enabled, when we're parsing the manifests or whatever, we say, okay, create this part of the schema, and then we have some like merging logic of those schemas that will take anything from the feature gates and anything from the default that kind of merge it together.
Yeah, and ours is slightly more complicated and slightly more powerful than what Gateway API has, but the end result is fairly similar. But yeah, I linked there an example that we have. So we like these special like feature gate aware max items where you can have one if there's like no feature gates, or if you're using the example feature gate, it would go to 3. And then depending on which of our feature sets we, tech preview stable are enabled, it would kind of merge those together into those sets.
Awesome. Where is that link? I think maybe I can explore it after, but I just want to make sure that that's.
We've just been putting things in the.
Oh, in the chat. Sorry, I'll grab
sorry.
those at the end. No, you're good. You're good. Cool. All right. I think. Do we have more to say? So I guess maybe just to summary, we can just continue the conversation too. Maybe next time if people want that. But so we're saying like maybe they're different. Is there a way then that we should try to make them more similar, or should for a partial use case, could the like DB form be adopted? I know you mentioned like essentially it could be adopted, but it would be unwelcome. I guess, do you see the path then, like maybe just keep the same semantics for their current respective places for now? Or I'm just curious, do you see a way of making them like more similar? Just curious, I guess, your thoughts, maybe to summarize the thoughts here.
So the reason I'm kind of bringing this up so much is that I think we all have a goal of we would like CRDs and built-ins to eventually use the same set of these markers and not to have any deviation where possible. But I think this is one deviation where we might have to. So I'm kind of expecting that long term, what we have is the if enabled for built-in types has to have a payload. But there is a special version of that in controller gen that works for CRDs where if enabled has a slightly different semantic and doesn't require a payload. And that would just be the inclusion exclusion logic. And so that would be something that we would have to call out in our future documentation that says this is how you write cube-like APIs if enabled requires a payload, unless you're expecting this behavior on CRDs. I think that's probably a viable path forward. It would get us what we need. It would get what Gateway API needs. It would get what the existing controller tools implementation needs. But it would be a deviation we have to call out.
Got it. No, I think that's great. I think that's it's interesting too, just because that pattern, I don't know how many cases, hopefully they are just one-to-one, but yeah, maybe in documentation, we can kind of have some kind of like base set of tags that then it can like splits potentially as minimal as possible just on the CRD versus built-in differences. And we can make that like something to think of early on. I think that's really good.
Yeah, I think it's good enough that we just explicitly call them out as separate, so that we have to make we all see that where we have these little differences, and we don't make them on accident. We make them deliberately. That's good enough for me.
Yeah, 100%.
Just to clarify, are we saying for CRD if enabled, no payload or just an optional payload? It sounds optional probably to me.
Yeah. So the way I would see this is if you had if enabled with no payload, that would be for the inclusion or exclusion within the schema.
Right.
But then you could have if enabled with a max items, right? And then it would just be the normal, well, it wouldn't be queue builder, but imagine plus queue builder validation max items.
Right.
That would then be gated based on the if enabled and the chaining functionality that we need to build.
I wonder if the if enabled pattern and stuff, whenever that can make it into controller tools, if there's stuff that we can take from our fork within OpenShift and kind of bring some of that like partial schema logic and stuff like that to help make it easier for theory authors to have some of that differentiation between like included, not included in the schema.
Yeah, so I've been giving a lot of feedback on the controller tools work in progress around like making sure that we don't deviate too far from what's going on with the upstream. I think we really should, if the if enabled and if disabled stuff is kind of cemented in the DV stuff, like start moving that forward around like these aren't feature gates, they're just options, right? If you give it a list of options, if the option is enabled, then we'll base the CRD generation logic based on that option. What I don't want it to be is like this is specifically feature gating, because I don't think that's true of the DV stuff. It kind of captures a bigger scope here. But the if enabled stuff can absolutely encompass what we're trying to achieve with that current feature gating one. But yeah, we can totally take what we've got downstream. Although I think there's not that much to it. It's not that complicated.
That makes sense. I think, yeah, I don't know what's in OpenShift. I think that makes a lot of sense to me as far as, because I think a lot of these things for CRDs seem like really helpful things people want to do. So yeah, if OpenShift has some things that might be, I don't know if we can document that. Maybe next week we can even discuss like what kind of additional things OpenShift has. But yeah, if we can, because I think right now we're in like an earlier phase and we're planning this out. So if we can just get as much information we can as to how folks actually use this, I think that'll be really helpful to plan out, like the best semantics here. So
Yeah.
I don't know if Joel wants to maybe bring up some. Yeah, I think that would be really interesting to discuss maybe next meeting.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in my mind is just the how we inject like handling partial schemas and stuff like that. I think that would probably be the most valuable to upstream, because otherwise it's just kind of like a bunch of wrappers and custom markers and stuff to support this feature gating behavior.
Yeah, so like to kind of give some differences between the way that other groups are doing it and the way that OpenShift are doing it is that most groups are just saying this is an alpha feature, this is a beta feature, and therefore, or this is a stable feature. So they have like their 3 generated schemas of like, this is alpha, beta, stable, and promoting a feature actually means finding all of the relevant markers and then upgrading them from alpha, beta, stable. Whereas in OpenShift, what we do is we have specific feature gates, and those generate a matrix of this is the base CRD with only this feature gate enabled, and then we merge that all together. So it means that when we are promoting, we don't actually have to change any of the API definitions themselves. We just change the options we put into the generator to say, okay, the stable one now merges in this gate as well. And that means that we are slightly safer, I guess, in the way that we're doing that merging and that promotion work. Whereas in Gateway API, for example, there is a risk that you promote the feature, but you forget about some of the markers and you accidentally leave some of those markers that you had in beta when you meant to put them into stable. But I think ours is a very particular use case, and most communities, I've not seen them asking for it, but maybe if we could make it easier, they would be like, oh yeah, actually this is better.
Interesting. Totally. Yeah, maybe we could follow up there next time. I know that's interesting, this matrix of like end schemas with the options.
If you want a deep dive on how that works, I'm happy to do a screen share next time and kind of show.
Yeah, no, I think I'll put it in the chat with that's awesome. Cool. Yeah, I think the next topic we had was, I know folks in the chat, or maybe just I think Prenshul's in the chat who actually I think submitted a PR out, but just as far as how to contribute. So I try to codify some of just declarative validation specifically. So it is early, but I try to codify some brief architecture pieces in the declarative validation feature branch. So essentially, similar to the other code generators, there's a code generator validation gen that generates these validations. We have tests for tags that are the format, pretty much it's something like a types.go file, the generated code for that, and then a test confirming that the tags work as that is. And we also have validation, this validate package, which essentially is the code that the generated code calls. And so if you poke around the repository, these are going to be 3 directories that you're going to get to know, like very well. And the idea is, as far as work streams or like why this is relevant, is that for declarative validation, especially for folks that want to maybe get started on the project, there's 3 main things that we're trying to do currently, especially for the new folks or anyone newer to the project, would be to create tags. So we have the open API. Essentially, we have like more like immutability. Maybe you could think of as a more experimental or something that has novel semantics. There are tags with 100% known semantics that come from open API that we just need to build out. So things like max length, minimum, maximum, min properties, max properties. We have like a number of these that we've proven out, but we have not done all of them. So that's kind of put in folks here. I know Pranchal or maybe Bryce had mentioned, kind of getting on items. So if you want to just look at, there's some open issues in the feature branch around that. But again, the way that would work is you'd pretty much go into validation gen, you would write a tag in the validators, you'd write the min logic, then there's example PRs. I think I put some here, but on how to do that. But essentially you make a validator like object that registers itself with this validation, with like our declarative validation library. You make a validate method that's actually called by the generated code. So for minimum, you would check the field value minimum, this kind of thing. And then you would write the test there. So that's kind of like hermetically, and that's like what we hope the community to do in building out these tags. Similarly, and I know Pranchal, this is actually what Pranchal went on to do, so thank you for that. We decided initially in the rollout for declarative validation, we were going to focus on just targeting, like when we would add tags to an API, we would register that type for declarative validation immediately. But I think now with we have a more broad reaching idea where, because it's a no-op to register APIs, we're actually planning on registering all APIs into declarative validation and then migrate fields over time. So we kind of have like a community call to action, which is start migrating, these APIs for us, which is essentially you're just registering it so that code can be produced, but there are no tags. So nothing So I think, thanks again, Pranchal, I think, who did cluster role. But again, that can be, there's an umbrella tracking issue for all the types here, but that's like another area where if someone's interested, that's an easy way to get started, because there's kind of example PR explaining the tags that you add to the type and how to wire up strategy.go, this kind of thing. And then thirdly, this is kind of actually what the work group is doing right now, is to prove out, and kind of land some migrations and hopefully help, like a new API along. For DRA specifically, we are migrating types. And this is the kind of the third leg of, at least again, like we're happy. There's a lot of work to be done, but this is kind of the initial scope for people that want to join the project, would be to actually migrate a validation. So we have registering a type, and then we have, actually migrating things. So like taking required and adding plus case required, which actually has code that, ensures that field's required, just as a short example. But we have examples. We haven't identified this as like a to-do for us, is to make an umbrella issue of maybe some easy items to do here. But if you're interested in kind of doing that, here's some examples, but that's like the goal. And then I don't know if it's ever explicitly stated in the KEP, it is stated, but essentially in 135, we're hoping to migrate a bunch of DRA fields. And with the hope for the next 2 releases, the idea is to help API reviewers. That's like the main goal, make their lives easier. And to do that, it's 2-pronged. One is obviously migrating kind of all of the legacy validations or handwritten validations to declarative validation. But the more feasible short-term goal is that all new APIs use declarative validation when possible. So that is the goal that we're building towards. So we're fleshing out the library. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to add these tags. And so again, if folks, can kind of get in there and help, if you're familiar with anyone, make a new API to use the tooling. But I guess I just want to call out that that's kind of the goal there. And so those are the main repo. That's KK. And we're considering right now, we have a rule where if a tag isn't used in a migration, it's in the feature branch. So that means if you want to add these tags, you're working in the feature branch. So I don't know if that makes it more difficult for folks, but we can discuss maybe moving that stuff upstream. But that would be like where you might go then, is if you want to join us in the feature branch for adding these tags, or in KK itself, you can work on a migration or helping us migrate the API type, registering them. And then outside of those repositories, we also have, I think, just work streams mentioned here, which is DV parsing for controller gen and adding tag support or controller tools. And adding tag support for the DV tags, also in Kube Open API. Similarly, kind of like adding support for these tags. And then it seems like actually this seems like it's done in Kube API Linter. Is a lot of the rules that we, so which is awesome. So I don't know if that, I don't have the hands up, but yeah, hopefully if anyone has any questions around or comments on if they are trying to get started in the repo there, hopefully these are some breadcrumbs that folks can follow, and definitely join the, feel free to ask in the Slack as well, any questions. And then if, those aren't of interest, but maybe you want to do some higher level things, we mentioned documentation. So, maybe this could be a place that we can discuss in our workstream too, but, generating better field level documentation for both native types primarily, at least in the near term, but then also CRD types. Which I mean have open API types, but again, we're trying to get this validation level logic and have some carryover tags. The idea of shifting left. So I think, I believe Red Hat has a tool that, like an IDE tool that does some validation checking of API types, some schema checks, but similarly trying to do potentially, these validations maybe in a shift left manner. And then, I think we already discussed, just some ML and annotation pieces, but obviously, at least, if we're shooting out a bunch of PRs for migrating, I think, ML review, as I think we mentioned before, and kind of schema conformance is important. So that was kind of a shotgun of a lot of things there, but, just hoping if someone is interested in the project, or hopefully someone heard something that maybe stuck with them there. And then there's also some breadcrumbs to follow. Great. So I think we mentioned parsing DV tags and the tag chaining. Did anyone get the chance to look into what it would take to? Right now we use Django has a code tags library that was made that has a schema for DV. Did anyone poke around with the tag chaining to see what it would take to get some other tools to support that? Or probably I was curious if anyone had looked into that.
I've not. I think I mentioned I was going to look into it. I've not had a chance to look into it yet, but I just still have it on my list of things to look at. So I'm going to plan to look into that for any of, like do some testing on how we would do that in Kube API Linter, and maybe start looking into, can we add some of those DV markers into some of the ones that, for example, like the KK validations that I think that I saw there was a table in that doc that said like some of them weren't ready yet because we needed the DV marker support. So maybe I could start looking into that. Probably starting a little later this week, maybe early next week.
Yeah, perfect. That's awesome. That's exciting. Great. And then, I think just briefly, we mentioned, so 135, kind of our goals there for DV. We're trying to build out DRA, land a lot of these migrations, and kind of plumb things through going into 136. So as far as we're in early planning, but I just wanted to call out the things that we're thinking of in case folks here have any, ideas also. But cross-field validations. So for declarative validation, right now, most of the tags are scoped to the value that the tag is placed on, with like a small number of exceptions. But cross-field validations, where maybe, the minimum that you're going off of is a different config option as part of that API. So then your tag references the field of another tag. And there's a lot of examples of this. So, you can think of, we have union support, but mutually exclusive. So figuring out how to do cross-field validations is something we plan to do for 136. We are hoping to kind of, think more rigorously and plumb out, how to use declarative validation and how it could be reused components for CRDs in 136. So that's definitely top of mind. So that's really the focus, of with this work group, which is awesome. And then getting some tags to be what we call DV only, which is, we mentioned the goal of for new APIs, we hope them to use declarative validation. Right now, to migrate a validation, essentially you need the handwritten code as well as the declarative validation code. So it's more work because you're doing the old path. But starting in like 136, we have this graduation path for tags. Then some will be graduated where someone can just add a tag for a new validation. So we're hoping to, I think we have the machinery in place now, but that would be the first usage of it. And we're hoping to expand upon this DV only and kind of, like evangelizing and making sure that it is the known pattern to use DV where possible. So that's kind of the 136 planning. So I'm sure we'll get into that more in the future, but great. And then I know last time we had some QAPI Linter updates. Joel, was there anything to discuss in the 2 weeks there? I know I don't know if every 2 weeks we need the updates, but I was just curious if there's anything that landed that you wanted to kind of note to the group here.
No, I mean, I was on holiday for about 8 days over the last 2 weeks anyway, so not been much progress. The next steps, I have a PR ready to post around the runnable binary. And then we want to look into Go Releaser to start getting initial releases out, because I know that's something that people have been asking for. So if anyone here has Go Releaser experience and wants to help me with it, that'd be helpful. And I guess the other thing I'll mention is, because we were kind of talking about getting involved with the DV stuff, if anyone wants to help enabling different linters on KK, that would also be very helpful. And excellent, Bryce knows about Go Releaser, so I'll just grab Bryce.
I think that's a great call out. I'm just gonna try to make a table here. Enabling linters in KK. That's great. And then I guess I know we mentioned some of the known friction for the 17 items. Are some of those like are some of those simple things that someone newer to the project could do, or do most of these have friction? Like they aren't kind of in KK for a reason, so to speak? I'm just curious, like, do you have like a prioritized list, or someone wanted to maybe help out there? Where would they go? Just like curious how to.
So in terms of like helping on Cal, we don't have any like GitHub issues around enabling stuff in KK right now. So the best place is actually that table we were sharing at the beginning of the call. Gotcha. Maybe we add another column there and people can kind of self-assign, I'd like to help on this one. If there are blockers to any of those, I've noted them in the comments there, and those are the ones that have got an N in the ready to be enabled column. The rest of them, it's just a case of turn it on, run the hack script that updates the Golang CI line configuration, run the linting, and then any new issues it picks up, you either have to decide, can I make this change in a compatible way? Or do I add an exception to the exceptions file? And then posting it up for API review. So the best thing to do with those would be look at the previous examples that I've merged. So if you just look for PRs I've written, the only ones I've been doing recently for KK are around this. Should be easy to find. Just kind of follow that pattern of enable one linter at a time, add exceptions, and then ask for API review. In terms of the stuff that's still to do on the project, the issues, there's 25 open issues there at the moment. Most of them, I think, are relatively straightforward for a new person to join in. Again, it's kind of a case of copy the basis of another rule that already exists, and then follow the kind of examples that, follow the notes in the issue for the actual specific behavior.
Cool. And that's interesting. Yeah. So it's not one-to-one, but it's interesting that maybe like going through these exceptions is something that could maybe, like, for example, in our work stream, we have to migrate, end things, and we're looking at, trying to automate it with AI. I don't know if KubeAPI Linter also would be in a similar boat for adding these exceptions, but just like an interesting maybe piece to pull that, these like both tools seem to have kind of large, potentially automatable, obviously like, the tools maybe aren't exactly where we want them to be today, but kind of migrational pieces. So I wonder if there's like a deeper thing that we could all be leveraging. I don't know if there is such a thing, but just an interesting thing to note that, it sounds similar that like you have the tag, but maybe the big issue is finding the exceptions as far as KK upstream is concerned. And I wonder if there is a way that tooling could help there. But I think I'm definitely going to poke around there. It's really
yeah. I think one of the interesting ones to do might be just like the optional or required. If we were to break that down into different API groups and different people looked at one API group at a time, and that only had like 20 things per API group where there was an exception, those would be a case where you can go through and you can spend the time to work out like what is correct here. Should this be optional? Should this be required? That might be a good way for us to kind of tackle that one, because I know that's important for the DV project as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And maybe we can circle back to that next time. I know we're getting to time. I want to respect the time, folks. But yeah, I think maybe next time we'll just add some quick ones. So yeah, next meeting, and we have OpenShift, the CRD. What was this? Forgetting exactly. But yeah, the matrix event schemas, which I think is pretty interesting. I guess like feature gating. Yeah, matrix event schemas, and then we also have kind of, yeah, I think that was an interesting topic, which is yeah, I think because the optional required is pretty important actually for DV, because that's like the prerequisite. Like each field has to be tagged properly to actually do the migrations. That's like pretty much one thing that we have discovered in attempting to do the DR migrations, is that you have to mark everything optional required first, because when you're doing these tests and generating like fake schemas, if the tooling does not know what's required or not required, it will like essentially, not go well. So actually, I think tagging everything with that is almost a prereq if we hope to do this huge horizontal piece. So that might be a good joint venture that everyone could work on. So I'll just kind of note that then. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining, and happy Tuesday. Bye.